In the year PM 3548, human explorers on the planet Big Demon discovered the remains of an ancient spacefaring civilization. In the decades that followed, the mysterious artifacts revealed startling new technologies, enabling travel to the farthest stars. The technologies represented the greatest leap in human advancement since the beginning of the Avatar cycle. It was heralded as one of the greatest turning points in human history. To the denizens of the galaxy, it was the Mass Effect. Chapter 3. The Citadel. Most of the others had fanned out, milling about in the chamber which led up to the Council's throne room. One was a Quarian, frightened as much as one could expect of someone so young before an assemblage so august. One was a tribesman, a renowned leader of men, and purportedly a washed-out specter. The second was a snappish and vocal pedagogue, who even now argued as vehemently as ever to the aliens arrayed before and against him. The third was a child of no clear national background, the Avatar. "Think he's made his point yet?" Shepard said. "He's getting there," Anderson coached. Shepard crossed her arms, her jaw set with a question she was wondering if she could ask. And when she remembered who she was, that question answered itself. "Captain, is it true you were a Spectre?" Shepard asked. "Is this the best time to talk about that?" Anderson asked. "Is there a better one?" Shepard asked, continuing their tactic of answering questions with questions. Anderson scowled, staring through the wall. It was 2 decades ago. The Council saw humanity as the newcomer species who'd actually managed to bloody their nose against their strongest military species. Of course they were interested in what we had to offer, and when I was offered the position, I jumped at it. Things just didn't pan out as we all hoped. Considering that nobody even knows you were a Spectre, I'd say that's an understatement," Shepard noted. Anderson gave her a glance, and then looked up to the podium. "Udina's getting to his point. Come on." Anderson and Shepard both moved up the stairs to flank the ambassador. As usual, the 3 most arrogant aliens in the galaxy were in attendance. And why wouldn't they be? As they listened, the voice of Saren, smugly mocking the ineptitude of humanity, filled the air, causing Sporadis's mandibles to flick. Shepard assumed it was disbelief. In truth, it was outrage. But she knew almost nothing about Turian facial expressions. Tevos nodded, consideration plain on her almost human face. Valern's expression was best described as Valern. "You wanted proof? There it is. It was sent through the same communications buoy as when he mocked us in this chamber. Its timestamp has been verified by Citadel security. The voice of Saren and his counterpart are clear and untampered." Shepard assumed that Sporadis was annoyed at having to eat his words. "This evidence is irrefutable. Saren will be stripped of his Council Spectre status effective immediately, and all efforts will be expended to see him brought to justice for this crime." Tevos tilted her head to one side. "That other voice is familiar. It could only be Matriarch Benezia Tisoni." "She's allied with Saren, so she's a traitor as well." Udina once again took the words from Shepard's mouth. "I would not have believed it of her, but the evidence is clear," Tevos said, not even trying to defend her fellow Asari. "She was a powerful biotic and had many followers. Her siding with Saren gives him, if not an army, then at least a very formidable force to reckon with." "I am somewhat confused about this mention of Reapers," Valern said. Once again there was a buzz in Shepard's brain, but she shook it away. It was getting easier to ignore. "What information is there on this entity or ideal?" "You would have to ask the person who extracted the information," to where Tally was trying to make herself appear as small as possible. I mean to say, when I extracted the information, there was a... Kila, this is so... Tally sputtered, her hands kneading. "Just tell them what you found, child," Anderson coached. The Quarian glanced to him, then straightened her back. "When I searched the Geth memory core about the term Reaper, I found programming which ascribed absolute and overwhelming value to it. If they were organic, I'd call the behavior worship. Like they believe these Reapers are gods. They view Saren as something like a prophet of these Reapers." "The conduit that Saren mentioned must be the key to bringing the Reapers back," Anderson said. They were believed to cause the end of the Prothean civilization. If they returned, they might do the same again. Sparatus and Tevos shared a glance, one which spoke a light year of doubt. Valern leaned forward. "Do you know what the conduit is?" "No, but if Saren's after it, he has to be stopped before he finds it," Shepard answered. "Are we seriously considering the charge that Saren is attempting to bring back hypothetical civilization-ending machines from beyond the known reaches of the galaxy?" Sparatus asked. "Where would they go that we couldn't find them? The Asari and Solarians have explored space for almost 4,000 years. Even the Turians have guarded the stars 5 times longer than you've had electric lights. This is absurd." Shepard scowled. "We tried to warn you about Saren, but you refused to see the truth," Anderson answered the charge. It was vexing that Shepard had to be the voice of diplomacy here. "And that's beside the point. Whatever Saren's after, he can't be allowed to get it." "Well put, Commander," Tevos said. "Since he has been stripped of his position and resources, he only poses a minor threat. But that threat must be expunged in its entirety. His connection to the Geth is itself beyond troubling." "He's no minor threat!" Udina shouted. "He has already attacked one human colony of his own initiative. How many other colonies must burn before we receive help? He could be anywhere in the Attican Traverse even now, plotting his next move. Send in the Council fleet!" Sparatus's mandibles fluttered a bit. This, as it turned out, was Turian anger. "If we send a fleet into the Traverse, the Terminus systems will see it as an act of war. We can scarce afford another open conflict with them. Besides, even 10,000 ships could not track one man in a place like the Traverse." Shepard looked up at them, her hands tightening into a fist. "But I can," she finished. All eyes fell onto her. "All I need is a ship and a crew, and I can bring Saren down. No fleet in the Traverse means no war with the Terminus systems. Everybody gets what they want." Tevos glanced to Valern, then to Sparatus. The first gave an immediate nod. The other leaned back. "No, it is too soon. Humanity is not ready for the responsibility of this position. If not now, when? Humanity will not sit in the shadows forever," Udina said. "And it is ill-advised to force them to," Tevos said. "The vote already stands 2-1. I would prefer we be unanimous, but—" Shepard arched her brow. But Sparatus let out a very human-sounding sigh of annoyance before tapping a few commands onto his console before him. Tevos then smiled and looked to Shepard. "Commander, please step forward." She did so. Tally was probably just happy to no longer be the center of attention, and be allowed to flee to some place not so public. Udina and Anderson watched with expectation. "It is the decision of this council that you be granted the rights and privileges of the Special Tactics and Reconnaissance Branch of the Citadel, by unanimous decision." From the outskirts of the council chamber, dozens, then hundreds of expectant faces began to lean forward, beholding a ceremony that few could have expected. No few of those faces were human. To them, this was likely the apotheosis of decades of hard politics, finally seeing fruit in the light of day. Valern, ignoring such hopes and expectations, gave his nod. "Spectres are not trained, but chosen," he intoned. "They are individuals forged in the fires of service and battle. They are those whose actions clearly elevate them above the rank and file." "Spectres are an ideal, a symbol," Tevos continued, with dignity and poise. And of course she did. All Asari sounded like that when they wanted to. "They are the embodiment of courage, determination, and perseverance. They are the right hand of the Council and agents of our will. They bear a difficult burden. They are the protectors of galactic peace, both the first and last line of defense. The safety of the galaxy is theirs to uphold." Sparatus actually managed not to sound snide when he spoke. "You are the first human Spectre, Commander. This must be a great honor for both you and your entire species." It somewhat fell flat, since Shepard knew it was a lie. "About time," she muttered to herself. "I'll get Saren, as long as I know where to look," she prompted. As a Spectre, you will have all the assistance we can provide, Valorn said. We have no doubt that Saren's fate is as good as sealed. She might not have been Avatar long, but she knew that those words were probably the worst ones to utter out loud. She bit her tongue to keep her from prompting that out, though. This meeting of the council is adjourned, Tevos said, and with that, the aliens began to file out. So I'm a Spectre now. Great. I'll pin it right next to the ribbon I got for being the Avatar, Shepard said as she descended the stairs to where the Quarian and Udina were waiting. This might not seem like it, but it's a big step forward for humanity in galactic politics, Udina pointed out. Even if we had to scream until our throats are bleeding, we will be heard. If I can see a human amongst the council in my lifetime, then I will die a content man. Good luck, Tally muttered sarcastically, until Udina shot her a glance and she wilted. I didn't mean... She's not wrong, Shepard said. The Hanar have been howling for a seat. Can they howl? The Quarian shrugged, even though the two military men didn't even bother to answer. For 800 years. For the Volus have been vocal about wanting one for twice as long as that. I thought you didn't keep up with galactic politics, Anderson said with a chuckle. I bunk next to Alenko. I have no choice but to remember something, Shepard said, rolling her eyes. I still need a ship. I'll sort that out, Shepard. It'll take some time, but you'll probably have what you need by 0600 tomorrow morning, Anderson said. Udina gave a nod. Now please try to spend the next 14 hours not causing massive property damage in the wards. I can offer no such promise, Shepard said as she trod away. In fact, such trotting managed to get her all the way to the elevators before somebody dared to interrupt her. And damn them for there being no other way in or out of the 2-kilometer-tall Presidium Tower than this. In fact, inside the elevator was a somewhat familiar face.
Shepard?
The very red, Krogan said as he leaned against the wall. A glance upward, to the ceiling of the elevator, showed that the speaker was dangling out of its housing. Rex, what are you doing waiting in the elevator?
I haven't been allowed in the Presidium Tower in nearly 500 years, Rex said testily. That doesn't prevent me from using the elevators.
They still remember a band they put down 5 centuries ago?
Heh. One of the council races is the Asari. They live almost as long as Krogans can. I'd say they have carrying grudges just as down to an art form as we do.
There must be something on your mind, Rex, Shepard said, pounding the key which would drop them into the Presidium ring.
I need a ship. It seems I've given myself something of a bad name with my usual mobility providers,
Rex noted.
And since you're going after Saren, I figure we can both deal with a mutual problem, provided you help me with a little problem I have.
Are you offering mercenary work? Shepard asked.
Depends,
Rex said. Upon?
Do they actually get their head out of their asses and make you a Spectre?
Rex asked. Shepard nodded.
Then yes, I'm offering.
What's your price?
Killing a particular Turian, and taking back what belongs to me, he said. Of course the down payment is something you can deal with right now.
Here we go, Shepard rolled her eyes.
Do you know about the consort?
Rex asked. No.
An Asari prostitute. A remarkably skilled one at that. She's got half the galaxy wrapped around her finger. Guess which half?
The one with penises, I assume? Shepard said with a smirk.
If only just.
That laugh soured quickly.
She's in a snin about something, and she's using some of her flunkies to put pressure on me. The Elcor ambassador has been oddly forceful. Then again, those are the only things I'd wager could win a fair fight against a Krogan, so I don't tend to mess with them.
So you want me to put the fear of God's goddess into her?
Get her off my back and I'll keep Saren's goons from putting a bullet into yours,
Rex offered. Shepard nodded and extended a hand.
This mean we have a deal?
For the time being. We'll revisit it if something needs to change.
Good.
Rex took that hand and gave it a shake which almost hurled Shepard into the elevator door. She regained her balance just in time for it to open, and see them through the entirely too white environs beyond.
Her place is hard to miss. Just look for a place which looks like a bordello.
Shepard nodded. Rex, she said as she strode out onto the path.
Shepard?
The Krogan answered her before heading off his own way. She was having a much easier time walking, now that she wasn't trying to move very fast. Each twitch of her thigh still burned like somebody was trying to ram an iron bar through it, then set it on fire, but now those twitches came less often, and to be honest, it wasn't even as painful as it had been at first. She'd even managed to bang her bullet wound into a table on her way to the tower without bursting into tears. Now, though, she was just happy that people were done trying to kill her. She moved through the crowds of the Dark Star Lounge, which was easy enough, because people tended to subconsciously step aside when a Quarian came near them. For all Quarians were considered the best mixture of galactic proportions with the Asari body type, they tended to, how did he describe it? Freak people out. The sound of music was smoother here than it had been at Flux, the last place she'd passed by. Not that it mattered. She could be sitting in the middle of a pentagon of rancorous hog monkeys and hear nothing but the soft tunes on ancient Quarian pipes. Living in an exosuit had its benefits, after all. Many, many drawbacks, but some benefits. Such as that when she looked at her bullet wound, it had been the first time in 3 years that she had seen her own leg. A glance towards the cavorting aliens brought a sting to her leg, which reminded her that dancing was absolutely out of the question. In fact, the whole reason that she came in here was, frankly, because she'd never been in a place like this before. They always made her quite uncomfortable. Not the noise, or the press of people. Both of those helped ease some homesickness. No, she didn't like this kind of place because it was loudly, overtly, sexual. Which is why she was so surprised to see a particular human sitting in a quiet booth in the corner, reading a pad and occasionally tapping a device on the table. She limped over to him, and when he looked up, he smiled at her. It was a wide, easy, and genuine smile, and it made her feel a bit funny. "Mr. Alenko, I never thought I'd see you here," she said. He was quite the specimen. Broader shoulders than you'd see in a Quarian, but built as though he'd been cut from stone. She wondered how he got into the armor he was wearing when he'd saved her life, and came to the conclusion that he'd had to be poured in. And didn't that just inspire sappy poetry in her young mind?
"Please, it's Caden. Honestly, I didn't think I'd see you here either,"
he answered her. "I like the crowds. It makes me feel like I'm back home," she answered.
"Right, the flotilla,"
he nodded. He gave a chuckle.
"I can't imagine what living in space my entire life would be like. Especially the way you do. Always moving, never in one place very long."
"It's just living," she said with a shrug. "I mean, having people around all the time was just normal back on the Raya. It was actually strange to be alone as long as I was."
Forgive me for assuming, but you sound rather young,"
Caden said. He paused to tap on his device, and gave a nod at whatever was displayed on it, then turned back to her.
"Are you on your pilgrimage?"
She leaned back. "Do you know about the pilgrimage?" She was understandably surprised.
"I read a lot," Caden said casually. "Although there's not much on what the whole thing is about, only that it exists and that every Quarian does it."
"It's a rite of passage," she explained. "A Quarian has to prove that she can bring something of worth to the flotilla. I'm surprised that you even knew about it. Most people just assume that Quarians are immoral thieves and vagabonds, ready to steal anything we can get our hands on."
"Most people don't pay attention as much as—"
He trailed off, tapping the device, and then turned his attention back to her.
"I do. That comes with the job, after all."
"What is that thing?" she asked, pointing at the device.
"This? It's a scanner."
"Why isn't it built into an Omnitool? Everybody uses Omnitools. Even I do," she said, opening it up, and quickly having to turn off several settings, since she left it about to play the Geth data again, and that would have been confusing and dangerous to be seen with in a bar. That, and her other settings, were about causing feedback loops and shield generators, or else nanoforging explosive chemicals for explosive delivery. Again, not something most people should bring to a bar.
"That's an interesting-looking tool," he said. "Is that a Nexus?"
"Mark 7. Father wanted me to have the best when I left the flotilla." She blushed under her helmet. Again, benefits of the exosuit. Nobody could tell you were embarrassed. Unless you went on at a ramble like Tally did. Frequently.
Your father must have some pull, he said, quickly tapping the thing again and nodding at its output. The 7 isn't even on the markets on Sirkesh yet.
He's got friends, Tally said uncomfortably, so she changed the topic, as awkwardly as ever. So, what exactly is the things you're scanning for?
Keepers,
he said. She tilted her head. Caden shrugged.
There was a Solarian messing about with the keepers up in the tower. I didn't see any harm with helping him get some scans.
Well, keepers are all over the Citadel. You shouldn't have any trouble finding them, Tally offered.
Oh, I'm finding enough of them, he said with a smirk.
She tilted her head in the other direction.
Well, there's a reason I'm sitting in this booth. It's directly over a keeper tunnel. Anytime one of them comes close, tap, and I've got a reading. I'm actually managing to catch up on some reading on this Turian author, Serpus, instead of running around. Easy as pancakes, my father would say.
That's very intuitive, she said. I mean, I would have been running around the Citadel all day trying to find keepers.
Sentinels are trained to use unusual solutions,
Caden said. He leaned back, then forward again to tap the scanner, then back once again.
It was fortunate that you came. I heard from the captain that he wants you to be part of Shepard's squad.
Me? Why? I'm not a soldier, I'm just a... She was about to say just a kid, but the truth was, she was on her pilgrimage now. And that meant, if she ever wanted to be a Quarian woman, she was going to have to start acting like one. I mean, I have a responsibility to my people.
Caden shrugged. I think Anderson is doing this for your own good as much as Shepard's. Saren might still want to tie up loose ends, and sadly, you're one of them. You'd probably be far safer with us than on your own.
Oh, that makes sense, she said. She fidgeted briefly before looking up at him again. Can I ask you something about Shepard?
You can ask. I don't know if I'll have the answer, but you can ask, he said.
Why is she so angry all the time? I mean, she killed those assassins in the most brutal way possible. She didn't even bother to shoot them. She just ripped them apart. Tally shook her head. Is that normal for humans?
No, not even remotely,
Caden answered. He sighed, leaning forward with his chin upon his knuckles.
That's one thing that I haven't been able to answer. I mean, the obvious point is that she was a Mindwar survivor. And surviving the Batarians will twist you up inside, but there's more there. And I don't know what it is. Not yet. And I'm not sure if I should even ask about it.
The whole thing had Shepard deeply wondering what the Krogan considered a bordello looked like. Between the surprise at Cora's den, and now this, she was seriously starting to wonder if any of the old sci-fi vids she'd watched when she was a child were true, or any of the westerns. This certainly didn't look like any of the cat houses which were featured prominently in Suong alone. In fact, from the street, it just looked like any retail store from a small business block. She shook her head and headed for the doorway. She had barely made it 5 steps when there was finally a crystalline chime in the air, and an Asari turned from chatting with another of her ilk to face her. She was, like all Asari, pretty much human-looking in broad strokes. The fine details were where the distinctions made themselves known. While they shared human faces, that face was either blue, or else one of the shades leading towards purple. Of course, they had no hair. Rather, they had some sort of tentacle thing which wrapped over their heads, tapering to the back. Their eyes tended to be blue, but she'd heard from Malenko, her constant source of trivia from across the galaxy, that they could be just about any color, and could even be amber or gold. This ones were blue, as was apparently usual. Another feature was the one which tripped Shepard up the most. Asari didn't have any goddamn ears. She sometimes found herself leaning slight to one side while talking to one, trying to figure out how they even heard things. And this one, bright blue as her species tended to be, was showing a great deal more blueness than most that Shepard had encountered. Her dress was more the rough idea of a dress than one in practicality, which was right about when Shepard realized why Rex called this place a bordello. It might not have appeared it from without, but within, this place oozed sex. But not the raunchy, naughty sex. This was the kind of sex that people saw in movies. It was clean, fun, spirited, and Shepard didn't even have the words to describe it. There was an artificialness to it all, but that was doubtless part of the charm. And the Asari weren't the only half-dressed members of the galactic community. There were quite a few humans as well. Even some of what Shepard had to assume were Turian females. Either that, or Turian transvestites. Which caused Shepard to have to stifle a chuckle before it came out. This place was weird. "Welcome to the consorts," the Asari before her said. "I am Nelyana, and I will be your receptionist for today. Who are you scheduled with this afternoon?" "I'm not scheduled with anybody," Shepard said with a note of confusion. "I need to talk to the consort herself." Nelyana gave a laugh, which Shepard heard as condescending, even though it was actually just indulgent. Needless to say, her jaw set and her fist tensed at that. "I am so sorry, but one does not just pop in on the consort. Would you like me to arrange an appointment?" she asked, and instantly, without waiting for Shepard's answer, started flicking through a console built into the entryway. I see that we have an opening at 10:15. It was 1300 now. On Tuesday? It was Wednesday. Just in time for New Year's. Shepard did the math in her head. 6 months? Are you telling me that woman is booked solid for 6 goddamn months? Yes, she has had a slight dip in patronage since the Batarian hegemony released its embassy, Nelyana said understandably, but not understandably enough. "She fucks Batarians?" Shepard asked, disgusted. Please, calm down." Nelyana glanced around, not sure why the human before her now had her hand on her gun. I'm sorry if I caused you inconvenience, but some things just cannot be changed. Please, accept this voucher for a free session when the schedule permits." Shepard almost shook with a rage which quaked through her, but she forced it down. Fire, either literal or figurative, wouldn't help her here. Hell with this, I'll find some other way to talk to her. She turned away, already trying to think of how to do it, but was forestalled when Nelyana waved a hesitant hand, and brought the other to... well, it certainly wasn't an ear. "Yes, Shiara?" There was a pause. "Yes, of course, mistress. I'll send her right away." Shepard's glare was all the question needing asking. With a nervous chuckle, she nodded inward of the building. It seems you've caught the attention of Consort Shiara. She's requested you to speak to her immediately." "So, no waiting 6 months?" Shepard asked. "No, it appears not," Nelyana said. "But could you please leave your gun at the front desk? This is not that kind of establishment." Shepard glared, but her grinding of teeth only saw her calming down enough to realize that the blue woman wasn't wrong. With a minor growl, she hefted her sidearm up off of her hip and tossed it to the woman, who caught it like she had no idea how to hold it. Civilians. How hopeless they were. She strode into the building, past the Turians and humans and Volus, that actually caused her to miss a step and stare for a moment. The Volus were a tiny species comparatively. The tallest of them came up to about Shepard's groin. Considering that they were about as wide as they were tall, they were hardly any sort of physical threat, and even less so when one realized that the exosuit they were wearing was the only thing keeping their body from exploding under the comparatively tiny air pressure that most species enjoyed. What one wanted here baffled the mind. Once again, Alenko's trivia to the rescue. She was going to punch that man for putting all this information into her head. It was as good as done. Shaking her head at the absurdity of Volus, and interstellar life in general, she moved to the back of the building, and then up the set of well-lit stairs. Obviously, she wasn't trying to create ambience here. That was probably something saved for her chambers, which, after a turn, also disappointed on that front. Shepard was beginning to doubt she'd see anything prostitute-related here besides the attire. After all that mental build-up. Hell, in the walk over she'd half considered that there would be whipping going on. The lack of it was, for reasons she couldn't readily explain, somewhat disappointing. Shiara's chambers were well appointed, and had numerous touches of luxury and class, but this place lacked even the sanitized sex of the room below. In fact, it just looked like a reasonable woman's study. And the woman before her, but for the blueness, and the tentacles instead of a hair bun, could have been any of her elementary school teachers. She was even dressed Conservatively. Shepard remained at a gawk for a moment. This whole situation was anything but what she was expecting. And worst of all, she saw the likelihood of problems being solved by a rancorous fistfight dropping precipitously. "You wanted to talk to me?" Shepard asked. She glanced toward Shepard, her eyes warmer than most. "I have heard a great many things about you, Spectre," she said, her blue lips pulled into a light smile. "You're certainly the talk of the Presidium of late." "And you're obviously somebody who listens where they really shouldn't," Shepard said. "I don't apologize for doing my job," the consort said with a shrug. "It is my business to know when important people arrive on the station. Many of them end up becoming my clients, so it behooves me to be in the know." "You're beating around the bush. I don't appreciate that," Shepard said. "And you are frightfully direct," the consort said with a slow shake of her head. "Always pressing forward, never looking to the left or right, never expanding your vision beyond what is before you. Tragedy befalls the blind much more swiftly than those who see, Spectre." "Enough of this! Why did you call me here?" "I have business to discuss," she said. "So do I. Erdnot Rex," Shepard said. Shiara sighed and glanced aside. "He and I were close once, but those days are long over. Now he is a threat to my clients, which makes him a problem for me." She gestured towards a very comfortable-looking chair, taking a seat in one opposite it. Shepard moved to it, but out of simple cussedness remained standing. "I think we can save each other a lot of trouble, and see that our interests intersect. I pressure Erdnot Rex because he is damaging my client base. One in particular is Septimus Oraka. Between my former associate Erdnot and a falling out, which we suffered recently, Oraka has begun a campaign against me." "You're stuck in the middle of a love triangle gone horribly wrong?" Shepard asked with a smirk. "In this business there is no polyhedron with enough sides to explain how complex relationships can become," she said, shaking her head lightly. She looked back up to the human. "I appreciate that you have not asked why he is turned against me. I respect his privacy too much to speak of it, but if you could convince him, soldier to soldier, to end this slanderous feud, I would consider it proper to release Erdnot Rex into your care." Shepard leaned back. "You make it sound like you've got him on a leash." She gave a chuckle and a smile. "I hold many leashes, whether I want to or not." She became serious once more. "And if that isn't enough, I am sure I can arrange for some other form of payment." "Don't twist my arm," Shepard said simply. "Where is Oraka?" She rose to her feet, quite gracefully, and gestured toward the door. "He spends his days in a human club down in the wards, drinking and spreading his lies about me." "And the universe plays with loaded dice in 3, 2, Shepard muttered. "Excuse me?" Shiara asked. "What club is that?" Shepard asked, already pretty sure of the answer. "Chorus Den," the consort said. "Called it," Shepard muttered. Louder, she addressed the Asari before her. "I'll deal with Oraka, and be back when he's called off the feud." She nodded, a clear understanding in her. In fact, the whole time she'd spoken, Shepard never felt like she was talking to an alien. That was odd, especially coming from an Asari. "I will be grateful when this difficulty is behind us. Now, I will ask you to take your leave. I have clients who are doubtless already anxious to see their appointments filled." "You don't seem much like I had expected you to be," Shepard noted as she walked to the door. "That is another of my jobs, becoming the right person for each client." The consort's words came as she crossed the threshold. Shepard was about to turn and ask what she meant by that, but the door slammed shut directly behind her, cutting off sight. She stared at the red square which hovered in the center of the door for a moment, before shrugging and starting back down to the goddamn elevators. Cora's Den again. At this rate, she was going to have to start up a tab. Executor Palin's nails tapped against the table, letting out a clack which reverberated through his embassy chambers. His mandibles flicked with growing consternation the longer he had to wait, and his blood pressure was probably at a level which Dr. Oppage would probably gawk at. It was hard enough to keep a job when people conveniently misunderstood what the law aboard the Citadel was. It was even worse when one of the people who misunderstood was a Turian who supposedly carried a badge to enforce it. "Vicarian, I know we've had our disagreements in the past," he practiced. trying to find a way to say it that didn't make him sound like green-blooded and soft, and simultaneously not like a ragging cloaca, as Oppage would have called. He scowled and thought of a new tack. "Vicarian, sometimes I wonder why you couldn't be more like your father. He was a..." No, he'll never listen to that. That was the burden of rank and status. The hierarchy was built, from the lowest level, with strict accordance to stature and place. While not as brutally restrictive as, say, the Batarian hegemony, it was a stratified society. Palin found himself amongst the higher of the 32 layers of the Turian hierarchy. But he got there by being professional, careful, and having an eye for weeding out problems before they became interminable. And he was starting to get that feeling from the officer he was waiting on. The door opened, and Palin leaned back, his hands before him on the table. Vicarian entered, all right. He did so with another Turian very close at his back, Antanas Bellic, a much lower-ranked officer in CSEC. He probably wouldn't have a momentous career, but he was reliable and dependable. Vicarian was his dipole opposite in that regard. "Is there a reason you're here, Bellic?" Palin asked. "There was an altercation in the Presidium, Executor," Bellic answered, smartly. His blue-black eyes flicked towards the source of Palin's continuing consternation. "An alteration?" "There was a Hanar in the Presidium causing a public disturbance. I just made sure he didn't escalate things," Vicarian said smoothly. Palin turned to Bellic. "He pulled a gun on the Hanar, sir." "You did what?" Palin asked, even though he'd heard quite clearly. "The problem was dealt with, and the Hanar won't be causing any more problems costing passers-by," Vicarian said. Palin could only sigh, palming his face with a 3-digit hand. "Garrus, no matter how much rope I give you, you insist on tying it into a noose," Palin muttered. "Bellic, you're dismissed." "Aye, sir." "It worked," Garrus said simply. "That's not the point," Venari Palin interrupted. "There's a way to do things, Garrus, a way which you constantly ignore for the sake of convenience. What happens when that Hanar brings a civil case against this precinct? Have you thought about that? Rules and regulation are getting in the way of actually causing a meaningful difference on this station." Garrus leaned forward, slamming a hand down on the table. "If you just get out from behind your desk once in a while, you'd see that." "Your father would be ashamed to see what his name has become," Venari muttered. "My father has nothing to do with this," Garrus answered. "In his day, he wasn't so strangled by red tape that he couldn't actually get something done. I don't know if it was the Batarians leaving or just a really bad change in leadership, but the last decade has been all downhill." "I'm going to ignore that insult to my character," Palin muttered. "If it wasn't for all this restriction, I guarantee you we'd be able to remove 100 monsters from the wards. There's no reason that another Salion couldn't turn up, and I refuse to allow a monster like him to get away again," Garrus stressed. "We're not talking about that old case, Vicarian. We're here to talk about gunfights in the wards and sloppy detective work. And apparently, threats of lethal violence against Hanar. You're going off the rails, and there isn't much more that I'll be able to say to prevent severe disciplinary action. If you're willing to make a formal apology to the Hanar and take a pay cut, then maybe I'll be able to keep IA from shuffling you out the door, but..." "Apologize for doing my job? Never." Garrus shook his head, his arms crossed before his chest. Palin sighed. "Honestly, I've gotten sick of this. I'm sick of everybody staring over my shoulder, so fixated on doing things the right way that nothing ever gets done. I'm sick of having to let psychopaths walk on technicalities that are 1,000 years old." Palin nodded, since he knew where Garrus was going. "I think I know what you mean. Maybe CSEC wasn't the ideal path for you after all." Now, that was a painful admission. After all, Palin had been the one to bring the son of legendary Hafis Vicarian into CSEC at such a young age, practically out of his mandatory stint in military training. The decision, and more importantly the ramifications, were on Palin's shoulders, every bit as much as they were on Garrus's. Garrus leaned back. "You want my badge and my gun, don't you?" Garrus asked. "We both know you don't use the gun I issued you, so I'll take it out of your locker, but yes," Palin said. He sighed, shaking his head in dismay. "I wish there was another path to take. Realistically, I just wish that you were a little bit more..." "Quiet?" Garrus asked, his head canted to one side. "Reasonable," Palin offered. Garrus shook his head, mandibles pulling in consternation. We both know I'm not a reasonable person. I gotta do what needs to be done. Palin nodded. Then you won't be doing it here. I'm sorry, Mr. Vicarian, but your service is no longer required by Citadel security. May you find better fortune with your future endeavors. Garrus didn't say a word. He just pulled the Omni tool from his arm and set it down on Palin's desk, before walking out of the office. Palin just sighed at the whole affair. The galaxy was simply not ready for a Turian so bloody wrong-headed. They already had Saren to worry about. His eyes flicked upward to the ceiling for a moment. Dear spirits, he invoked silently, please don't let that boy follow in those same dark footsteps. Cora's den was as Shepard remembered it. It flowed with smooth jazz and rancorous conversation. Well, it did, until Shepard opened the door, and both stopped instantly. True, the music did continue, but as soon as the Quarian singer caught sight of Shepard, she halted mid-tone with a terrified squeak and hurled herself behind the pillar which fastened the stage to the bar. The other musicians hit a sour note, but kept playing. After a few moments, mostly of Shepard looking around the room, and most notably, not shooting anybody, the conversation started up again, and the Quarian came out from hiding, returning to her singing. Shakily. Shepard moved down into the area of the bar. Welcome to Cora's Den, the bartender said, his voice carrying the same cat-like vibration that most Turian voices had. He seemed mostly focused on his job. What will you be having? Information, she said. Sorry, I don't serve that, only drinks, he said. Then he looked up at her and blinked. Oh, you. I suppose I have to thank you for owning this place, he said. So you're the inheritor of the bar? Yeah, and I'm not allowed into the back room. The Turian cast a thumb over his shoulder. C-Sec hasn't finished shampooing the former owner's brains out of the carpet yet. They clean crime scenes? They got a whole division dedicated to it. Something about the necessity of sanitary conditions on the Citadel. I think they just don't like having human blood on the ground around Turians. Like we could get sick off anything you got. He laughed aloud at that. What's so funny? Shepard asked. He stared at her for a moment. "'Cause of the proteins," he answered. She stared flatly. "You do know we're dextro, right?" "And that means?" The Turian shrugged. "Our bodies just do things differently than yours do. And the rest of the galaxy, pretty much. We can't eat your food. We can't drink your alcohol, unless it's absolutely 100% alcohol by volume. And who'll drink that dreck? But that doesn't matter. Do you want something? I'm pretty sure I've got some Batarian whiskey down here if you're feeling adventurous." "The only thing I do with anything Batarian is shoot it. Out of a cannon. At a black hole," Shepard said testily. Fine. We've got brandy from a monastery on Lessus. It's a famous vintage," he offered. "I'm looking for a Turian general. Anybody like that in here?" She waved the bottle of blue liquor aside. "Well..." He craned his neck and pointed to a booth in the corner, where a dark-skinned, or plated, Turian was staring up at the jazz quartet, his gaze distant and unfocused. "We've got one guy who keeps going on about discipline and the fate of traitors. I figure he's just an angry drunk. Honestly, if you're his ride home, I'd be quite thankful." "I'm something like that," Shepard said, cracking her knuckles and moving to the booth. Notably, it had been the same booth that Addix was sitting at yesterday. He didn't even register until she sat down opposite him. "Septimus Araka?" He finally turned away from the Quarian and stared at her, his mandibles twitching around very sharp teeth. "I'm he. And who would that make you?" "Somebody who really should have better things to do," Shepard said. "You've been causing a lot of problems for Sha'ir with the things you've been saying."
Good,
Araka slurred slightly.
Maybe she'll feel 1,000 times the pain of that she's given me. Then the galaxy will be just in proper place. Just in proper place.
His head dipped until his brow almost pressed against the tabletop. He shook it slowly.
I've seen so many horrible things in this galaxy. There was only one woman who could make me forget them. And she rejected me. Me! Septimus Oraka, General of the 7th Turian Fleet.
Shepard shook her head in disdain. Some general you are. Getting shit-faced because an Asari turned you down. Have you ever thought about how bad you're making Turians look? That they can't even stand a little bit of rejection? No wonder we managed to press you right to the Trebia relay. You roll over at the first sign of resistance. You wouldn't have made it past that relay, I assure you, Araka said, slowly throwing off the paralytic inebriation. We would have crushed you into dust if you tried coming through. And for your information, those troops can kiss my leathery backside. I was just going to retire to be with her. And this is probably why she kicked you to the curb, Shepard said without humor. She saw that you're going soft, in more ways than one I can only assume, so she had no more use for you. How dare you say that? Araka shouted, banging his fists on the table. Shepard smirked. How is it any worse than the things you've been saying? She pointed out. Araka fumed for several long seconds, before he leaned back in his seat and let out a weary sigh. You're right, human. Spirits preserve me, but you are right. I'm the reason she rejected me. That is the only truth that there is, and I'm being an idiot for not admitting it. A drunken old idiot. Araka commiserated. If you ever want to be worth having another shot, you're going to have to do better than this, Shepard said. So just straighten up and act like a general? Araka asked. He gave a chuckle. You know, for her, it's worth the effort. Even if she won't take me back, she's worth trying. Good, she said, turning away. One more thing, human. One more thing, human, the Turian said. She moved back to the table, but didn't sit down. Some of the lies weren't exactly lies. There was an Elcor whom I learned some compromising things about. I made it seem like they were being spread around by her. Take this manifest. It shows how I got the information. Tell him where it really came from. She doesn't deserve... She doesn't deserve what I did to her, even by proxy. Shepard glanced down at the data and raised an eyebrow. So the target was an Elcor ambassador. She glanced distantly for a moment as she considered that the old avatar effect was still in fine form. There was no such thing as coincidence when she or any of her generational predecessors were nearby. Notably, this was the person who'd been giving Rex such a hard time. All right, I'll deal with this. And you? Just drink whatever the Turians use for coffee and shape up. I never thought I'd have to say this to a Turian, but come on, man. You're a soldier, for God's sake. Maybe after I finish this drink, Araka said, and set about nursing the last of many cups he had on the table. Shepard just shook her head. Sometimes she wondered why she even bothered. The lights of the Normandy were pale and blue-tinted. Not surprising, given that the ship wasn't entirely of human design. Turians could see better in blue light than humans could, and it let them keep their night vision if power failed. But all in all, it was more than sufficient for the gunnery chief to do her work, and in her work she found some degree of satisfaction. Unlike the other who was stalking around the bay of the Normandy. Al-Wahim gave a glance to the scarred biotic, who was seemingly trying to wear a hole through the deck panels with her boot soles. Al-Wahim kept her pace, though, and kept her guns clean. If nobody else was going to do it, then she would fill the breach. After all, she had to earn her keep aboard this ship. "Where is he?" the biotic demanded tensely. "And whom do you wait for?" Al-Wahim asked. "Stop eavesdropping, Sandfoot," Nil's daughter barked. The Si-Wang-Yi soldier turned and gave her a wan expression. "Sandfoot, I expected a greater and more depraved form of obscenity from you. Something which cut to the bone and saw me bleed. But you default to ethnic slurs. Shameful," she tutted primly. "Yeah, well, fuck you," Nil's daughter answered. "You are waiting for the civilian Murdoch, yes?" Al-Wahim asked, as she pulled the buffer from the Banshee that she brought with her from Eden Prime. She gave a cluck of her tongue and a shake of her head. At this rate, she'd be worn down to a nub in a matter of weeks. And Avenger frame rifles were supposed to be reliable. Ha! Cheap is what they were. If I wanted somebody watching my every fucking move, which I don't, then I'd lurk around Alenko. You can just piss off, Nil's daughter snapped. Al-Wahim frowned a moment, though, as she quickly put the Biotic's favored shotgun back together. The man is a source of confusion, Al-Wahim admitted. I didn't know that there were civilian contractors aboard this ship. We're already playing host to 2 different kinds of aliens, and you're worried about the guy who cleans the toilets? She asked with confusion. I hold a strong reservation about the Quarian, and stronger in that the commander seems intent on bringing other aliens aboard, Al-Wahim admitted. They are not human, and will think less of us than they do of their own. They will use us to their ends. I am not confused by this, I am only annoyed by it. Confusion finds me in other places, like your Murdoch. I ain't your girlfriend, Sandbender. I don't gossip in the corner like you do, the Biotic muttered harshly. I am no Sandbender. Were I would still take up the rifle. It is in my blood. Were it not for my ancestors, you would likely have fought against the Turians with swords and bows. You care deeply for Murdoch, yes? Just 'cause he tends to show up naked in my bunk. Don't think that means I care about him, she said harshly. Al-Wahim raised a brow at that. Oh, what now? Are you laughing at me? I think you do care about him. I only wonder why. Nil's daughter glared at Al-Wahim for a long moment, before turning and leaning against one of the great struts which held up the ceiling from the deck. I've got a hard time trusting people. Always have. Don't know why. When my back was against the wall, Murdoch could have just done about anything he wanted to me. Instead, he peeled me off the wall, put a loaded gun in my hand, and told me to go nuts. I figured I should return the favor. Sexually? What? No. Well, yeah, but... She shook her head. He needed a way out. I gave it to him. Now shut up, go back to playing with your guns, and stop goddamn talking. As the Biotic wishes, Al-Wahim said with a small smile, which didn't go unnoticed by the irate Biotic. Then again, irate was pretty much the best that one could hope for from her. That was something else that Al-Wahim didn't understand. How somebody so prone to wrath and rage, and so frequently demoted, could still be in the service. She glanced aside. Why are you not a mercenary? What are you talking about? Nil's daughter demanded. Your temperament speaks more for fighting for money than for cause, and the freedom would, at a blush, seem better to suit. So why don't you cleave to the Alliance? Al-Wahim asked. She shook her head. I'm done talking to you, she said, walking away. Al-Wahim only shook her head lightly at the lost chance to have her curiosity sated. She didn't doubt, if she remained aboard the Normandy, she would have ample opportunity to learn more. If all else failed, she would simply have to speak to Lieutenant Alenko. He seemed to know about a great many things. The elevator opened even as Nil's daughter was approaching it, showing the fairly long-haired man who was frequently unshaven, his grin showing several broken teeth. The edge of tattoos peeked up past the neck of his blue and white jumper. This would be the Murdoch character she was so enamored upon. Nil's daughter shoved the advancing Murdoch back into the lift.
Well, babe, what's up?
We're getting off this ship. You're taking me out to dinner.
I thought you said you had an itch,
Murdoch asked. Yeah, well, I'm learning the benefits of delaying gratification. Now shut up and treat me like a lady. As the door slid shut, Al-Wahim got one final glance at him looking utterly baffled.
You sure you're a lady?
He asked, just as the bulkhead slid into place. Oh, fuck you, Nil's daughter's voice came, muffled though it was, through the layers of explosive-resistant metal, which brought a distant chuckle to the Si-Wang-Yi's face. Ha, Nil's daughter was angry, the gods were in heaven, and all was right with the galaxy.
Delighted welcome. Hello, human. Welcome to the embassy of my people.
Shepard felt a moment's pause as she looked upon the Elcor which inhabited the room. She'd learned a lot about the Elcor when she was young. Unlike the Turians, whom she had no interest in, and the Batarians, which she presumed lawless savages, the Elcor had seemed like kindred spirits. They were gray of hide, their faces blunt and beady-eyed, and stood at a remarkable height. Their great arms were coated with dense muscle, and were completely capable of mashing anything that angered them into paste. But they were so long of a temper as a species, and even down to their surliest scum, that only the Hanar were more polite and friendly. They managed to be a part of galactic society for almost 1,000 years, and had never started a single war. There was a time when Shepard respected that. The room was white, as most of the Citadel's Presidium was. She was starting to get tired of white. Also present was another Elcor standing nearby, twitching slightly, while a Volus in those nearly spherical suits stood in a degree of discontent nearby. "Is one of you Ambassador Zaltan Hosnori Gorobashinu?"
Distant and upset. I am.
The one standing aside the desk answered. Even Shepard couldn't withstand the chuckle actually being in the room with these things brought about.
With honest concern, how may we help you today?
The other asked.
I am Kaleem Kjorman Danazrid, and I am the ambassador of the Elcor people on the Citadel.
Shepard had a moment's confusion. I thought Zaltan was the ambassador.
They both are, Earth Clan,
the irate Volus answered, his breath hissing as he had to suck deep of the methane mixture that Volus needed to survive.
Another insult from the Council. Not only do they reject the Vol prospect from a seat in their august body, despite all that we've done for them, they force me to work in a shared space with both of these newcomers.
Chastising rebuke. Din, we are only newcomers to you by 2 centuries. The Council only accepted those who are willing and capable of fighting external threats. With solemnity, for all their savvy, the Volus are not great warriors,
Callan pointed out. They spoke mostly through gestures and pheromones amongst themselves, so had to preface everything they said to make it clear to aliens. Shepard found it adorable in her youth. Now she found it, well, still adorable, but she'd never admit it out loud.
Bah! The humans will have a seat before the Volus with the way that the Council made them their pets.
Din answered with a wave of his stubby arm. Pets? How are we their pets? Shepard demanded. They look down on us like we've got a communicable disease, ignoring everything we say, overlooking us on every meaningful decision.
With strained patience, please ignore Din Korlak's anger. It is not directed at you personally. With pride, Zaltan and I both provide our services to the Council as ambassadors. As all perspectives of Elcor culture must have representation, I provide the male perspective, Zaltan the female.
You're female? Shepard asked.
With annoyance and barely concealed tension. I thought that was obvious,
Zaltan answered. Shepard glanced between the 2 Elcor. Both were wearing pants. But besides that, only the gravity mats, which they wore on their backs to be comfortable in the comparatively puny gravity of the Presidium. Then again, since the ring only had 3/5 Earth's gravity, it wasn't exactly comfortable for Shepard, let alone for something which evolved on a 4G world. She shook her head. You've been putting pressure on a Krogan named Erdnot Rex recently, am I right? She asked, arms folded.
With shame and outrage. The consort Shiara is using him to spread information which would compromise my authority as ambassador. I cannot say more. It is too embarrassing.
Well, you can leave both Rex and Shiara alone, Shepard said, handing a pad towards the blunted face of the Elcor. It daintily reached up, with one of its fat-fingered hands it was balancing on, and took the thing, holding it close to its face.
With shock and alarm. These are the facts that were being held over me. Confused. How did you find this human? With pitiable humility. What do you want from me?
What? Nothing. Shepard shook her head. These things were being spread by a Turian, not the consort. and he had to jump through some extreme hoops to get them. So I'm pretty sure that nobody who could use that against you actually has access to it.
With overwhelming relief. Thank you, human. You have cushioned a great fall.
The entire massive frame of the thing drew down for a moment, tension leaving it. Then, its great head peeked up again, and its mouth thing fluttered for a moment.
With sudden alarm, I have done disservice to the consort. I must atone for it. Please forgive me, human, but I must go at once. You can go after the day's work is over, Zaltan.
Callan pointed out, in the exact same drab, monotone voice that they used with aliens. But a little girlish part of Shepard let out a very much buried squee, as it didn't do the same explaining before talking thing that it did with aliens. The rest of Shepard, who had suffered and fought and killed for a decade and more, she just rolled her eyes.
With admiration, thank you, human. You have eased a burden on my comrade. If you have any need of service from the Elcor Embassy, feel free to ask it.
Just what we need, Din muttered irately. An Earth clan interrupting us at all hours of the day. Shepard shook her head and started walking to the door.
With annoyance. Not every human is out to get you, Din. Some of them, like this one, seem to have our best interests at heart.
Bah! She has an ulterior motive for being here. That is as clear as glass, Din countered, and he was not wrong. Shepard walked away from the embassies, past the Avena terminal where the holographic Asari tried to be more helpful than a computer pop-up, and invariably failed. Across a bridge, which overlooked a massive statue of a Krogan on one side, and some impressive fountains on the other. This part of the Presidium seemed custom-built for people to saunter out of their day jobs at the embassies, drool over the consort for a while, buy some overpriced crap, and then take the elevator down to the wards. Little did she know, she was closer to the truth than she realized. It was only a matter of minutes at a stiff walk before she reached the entrance to the consort's bordello. Even as she approached, she pulled her gun from where it clung to her side. Nilyana, still working at the entrance, widened her eyes in alarm. And then in confusion when Shepard turned the gun and pressed it to the Asari's chest as she moved onward. I'm sorry, but you can't go in there without... Shepard stopped and turned and glared at the Asari who was now carrying her gun. Despite being the armed one in this confrontation, Nilyana flinched. Doubly so when Shepard let out a snort which lit with fire. I'm sure Shiara's expecting you. Please, go right in, she said with a fragile cheerfulness that only outright terror could inspire. Shepard didn't really give a damn. She moved past the females of many species and up the stairs at the back of the room. The doors opened before her, and saw that Shiara was sitting at a table at the far side of the room, clad in a towel, and sitting glistening as though she had just taken a shower. Shepard stopped silent for a moment at that, but then she shook her head. The sooner this was dealt with, the sooner she could get moving again. Saren needed to die. This was an obstacle to that result. I've done what you asked. Araka stopped his campaign, and there should be a chastised Elcor slinking in here in a few hours, Shepard said. Shiara turned in her seat and nodded. She rose, rolling her shoulders. Thank you, Shepard, she said. That was a matter which, understandably, I couldn't resolve on my own. Udnot Rex, I grant you. He will have no more trouble from me, from what he's done in the past. I can't extend that offer to any future misdeeds, but I'm sure you understand that. It's only sensible, Shepard agreed, still looking the Asari in the eye. Krogan will be Krogan, after all. You have my gratitude nonetheless, she said. Shepard scoffed. I can't spend gratitude, she said, and there was something she desperately wanted to buy, like a rifle that wasn't so terrible that it qualified as a prison sentence. Shiara shrugged. I don't make a habit of incurring debts, Shepard. A few credits for your expenses will be transferred to your account, but if you're interested, I also offer a gift of words, she said with a remarkable level-headedness, despite her subject matter. Shepard raised an eyebrow at it. I see your skin, Shepard. It is hard and unyielding as the scales of any Turian. A wall you build between yourself and those around you. You push them away so that you cannot feel them. You use your strength against those who wrong you, but you have not learned the lessons of strength and forbearance. Not all problems can be solved with a bullet. Most can, Shepard said. Shiara's glance told Shepard to shut the hell up, with the same sort of efficiency as a glare from Admiral Hackett. This is who you are, but this is not who you will become, Shiara explained. It is only the foundation of what greatness will come to you, and I am sure that greatness will come. You are better than you believe you are. Remember this when doubt descends, Shepard. Shepard glanced to one side. Really? I don't suck as much as I think I do? Is that insufficient? She asked. Kinda, Shepard offered. The consort's brow rose, and she flicked a finger towards the wall, her body glowing blue for a moment. When she did, the lights dimmed slightly, and the soft music which had been playing grew a bit louder. Every inch of Shiara's body changed. Not the grotesque alteration of a monster movie. No, this was the most subtle of things. Just the tiniest shift in body language and posture. But because of that incremental change, she changed from somebody who was almost gender-neutral in Shepard's eyes, despite her state of near nudity, to somebody who was the absolute embodiment of sexual lust. Well, perhaps I can offer you something else, then, Shiara asked. Her lascivious lips now pulled into a venal smile. Shepard's eyes grew quite wide, then the towel started to slip. This had just gotten unexpected. The Asari at the door seemed quite beside herself. Then again, they frequently did when he was around. Krogan tended to inspire that sort of reaction from most aliens. In fact, in Rex's long history of dealing with puny aliens, he only encountered one which didn't immediately fear and revile his kind, and that was the humans. Instead, they treated Krogan like pets, and the Krogan let themselves be so treated, which was disgusting and pathetic. That was a grudge for another day, though. He'd had enough of them stacked up that he could stop eating tomorrow, and the sheer bile in his hump would probably see him through a decade. As he stomped closer, he took a moment to glance to his right. The statue of Garatako Kir still sneered over the people who walked along the Presidium. He'd only been a few decades old when they made the statue of him. Now he was probably the oldest sapient being alive. Even Rex would have to double his own age to come close to that level of longevity. And he had no doubt that something would kill him long before he got the chance. At least, they would never take it down. There might not be many Krogan, and those that were never got to come up here, but they would still probably raise a holy stink if they learned that the one glory that the galaxy would admit to them was getting torn down for some politician's ego. The Asari finally noticed him. Not the one he remembered, but then again, the last time he'd been welcomed by the consort was about 40 years back. Only Asari could come close to this sort of life expectancy, but they tended to be a lot less rooted. Oh, I'm sorry, sir, but we're booked solid for the moment. Is there somebody in particular you wanted to speak with?
No,
Rex answered. He leaned aside and noted that Shepard's gun was haphazardly tucked into a nook beside her console.
I think I'll be having a sit for a while.
I'm not sure you're supposed to do that, the Asari said. Rex just let out a sigh.
Are you going to stop me?
He asked, his tone weary. She glanced from her console to him, then shuddered for a moment.
That's what I thought.
Then, with all the grace and poise that the Krogan were renowned for, he dropped himself onto the well-padded couch, which had the unfortunate effect of creating a very loud creak as the metal buckled just a little bit under his weight.
There, out of sight, so I don't scare off foot traffic.
Sir, this place is for paying customers only, the Asari offered with a very worried tone. So the blue girl had a quad after all. Or maybe she just really wanted to keep a job out front where she wouldn't have to deal with the perverts and the Volus, when the two didn't overlap. Rex pulled a couple credit bars. Each one of them a small amount of Ezo pressed into platinum, and tossed them to her. Unlike a chit, they had a definite value. Notably, he wouldn't need to get them back when he was done. It was the last circulated currency left, ever since the Volus took over banking pretty much everywhere.
There, I'm renting a couch,
Rex snapped. She flinched and turned her attention decidedly elsewhere. Shiara's missive had been fairly unexpected, doubly so that it landed so quickly. For a human, Shepard had a way of bending people. She also had a very Krogan way of solving problems, notably by punching them until they were no longer problems. He could respect that in a way, and now, since he knew where Actus was, it was just a matter of getting her pointed in the right direction. Most people said that Krogan were impulsive and hasty. Truth was, they were as patient as stone when they had to be, and they had to be. Rashness got Krogan killed on Tuchanka for millions of years, just as inaction did. As he sat, he thought, combing through the memories of the last century or so. It was a practice which was once common and widespread amongst the Krogan. A meditation, taken in moments of quiet, so that the very old could cull pointless memories from their mind and keep the lessons learned from them. Rex himself could tell anybody who asked a dozen ways to kill a Turian, all of them learned firsthand, but not for the life of him recall when exactly he'd learned them. Those memories didn't matter after all. Other fights, like Alina, those were the ones worth holding on to. Rex sifted his memory sitting in a brothel, because if he didn't, he'd get just as crazy as Reeve. Hello, Garrus. Welcome back. The Asari's voice took a more relieved tone. Are you here about the little problem? I'm not an officer anymore, Nilyana. Vicarian's voice came upon the solipsistic morose which Rex sat in, and caused him to flick an eye open. He didn't need to turn to the Turian. Perk of being prey on the most dangerous planet in the galaxy. They had essentially 360-degree vision. Oh? Nilyana asked. She glanced towards Rex, worry still on her face. I thought that you were here for... Garrus turned and gave Rex a nod. Rex? Garrus offered.
Vicarian,
Rex answered. Has Erdnot Rex caused any trouble while he's been in here? Garrus asked, obviously expecting a certain answer. Well, no, but... Garrus nodded at that. I might not be an expert on the law. Rex laughed at that. But I'm pretty sure you can't arrest a Krogan for being a Krogan. Hell, you couldn't even pull that one on a Batarian. She fidgeted a bit, and the Turian sighed. Look, if it makes you feel better, I'll keep an eye on him. Thank you, she said gratefully. And then, Garrus, still wearing the blue and black CSEC armor, but apparently no longer amongst them, sat down on the other side of the couch, which let out another ominous groan. I didn't think I'd see you here. I heard there was bad blood, Garrus offered.
Was being the operative term,
Rex answered.
So, finally gave you the boot from the Force, did they?
You make it sound like you were taking bets, Garrus chuckled.
I was. And you couldn't have lasted another 3 weeks? Bastard, you just lost me 1,000 credits.
Well, for what it's worth, I hear a physicist down in the wards won the pool, Garrus pointed out. I'd ask you what you were doing here, but I think we both know who you're waiting for.
I might surprise you,
Rex said. Shepard, Garrus answered. So in fact he didn't. I'm surprised you're looking for work with her. Her anti-alien sentiments are pretty well known.
Anti-Batarian. And the way those idiots have been acting for the past few centuries, they deserve getting human boots up their asses.
Rex shrugged.
She doesn't seem to have any problems with your kind besides the post-war jitters.
Garrus nodded for a moment, leaning forward on the couch. That's relieving. I heard some dark things about her from one of our agents who had friends in the Alliance.
Such as?
Butcher of Torfin, he answered. Only saved from a lengthy prison sentence because she was... whatever those humans call that.
Avatar.
Rex supplied the term. Yeah, I always wondered what it'd be like to be a bender.
Are you sure you're not?
Rex asked, a sarcastic smirk on his face.
Humans have the edge of us. Where a Krogan walks, he walks with thunder. But them, they can throw lightning and ice and even fly, without a speck of Ezo in their brains. Hardly seems fair,
Rex said. You've been giving this some thought.
I've had a very slow couple of decades,
Rex justified. So how long has she been in there? Garrus asked. Rex glanced at his suit's built-in chronometer. He was too old to fart around with Omni-tools, and they were too fragile anyway, considering the way he fought. So he'd been meditating for about an hour. It seemed to pass so quickly.
A while,
Rex answered. You don't think that, Garrus asked, but the answer to that particular question came staggering out of the back room of the consort's chambers. Her clothes untucked, and obviously recently put back on. Her red hair, which had been tied into a tight bun at the back of her head last Rex saw her, now spilled tangled and disheveled across her back, and she had the most hilarious look of utter bafflement on her face as she came to a stop before the Krogan and the Turian that Rex couldn't deny himself at least a little bit of a chuckle. "Shepard, you look rested," Garrus said with a smirk. It was so pebbly," Shepard said, obviously not entirely recovered from the experience. Rex could empathize. Shiara had a way. That way could lead to some truly remarkable sensations. "Everywhere pebbly." Rex got to his feet, no doubt to the relief of the couch under him. It almost definitely wasn't built to bear a ton of weight on it, even with the reduced gravity of the Presidium.
"You got the consort off my back, just like you said you would. Where's your ship?"
"So blue,"
"Shepard!"
Rex snapped. She shook her head, blinking, as she finally returned to the waking world. Does this mean I'm a lesbian?" Shepard asked. "Only if you decide to swear off men forever," Garrus said with a chortle. Shepard affixed the Turian with a glare, which was more to do with not wanting to admit that she'd been got than any racial tension. "You're going after Saren, right? Well, you can count me in on that." She finally seemed to cast off the befuddlement complexity, and that scowl turned into a querious expression. "And what about your work with C-Sec?" "Not an obstacle," the Turian answered. He got up and nodded out the door. "Out there, I can actually get something done, without the red tape strangling me and hounding my every move. Saren's a threat and a black mark on the name of my entire people. If he's really found a way to control the Geth, then he has to be stopped." Shepard stared up at the Turian for a moment, then shrugged. "Welcome aboard. You can take your armor and a Footlocker's miscellany. I'll clear it with Anderson."
"And am I going to need to be cleared?"
Rex asked with a dry tone. "You're Krogan," Shepard said, as though that was all the answer. But unlike every other alien in the galaxy, that answer went to a different direction than most he was used to. "Alenko, are you still shorebound?" "What?" "Well, tell him to smarten up or you'll shoot him." Garrus and Rex shared a confused glance and a shrug. "Who told you to scan the Keepers?" Shepard asked, followed by a long pause. "Look, I don't care. Just fix it. If they want to kill each other so badly, let them. And send a message to the Quarian. She's not going to want to..." "Really?" Shepard glanced ahead. Never pegged her for a club-going type."
"How did you peg her, Shepard?"
Rex asked. "A hugger," Shepard answered darkly, like it was the worst thing in the galaxy. He could empathize. The last thing he needed was a Quarian piejack hanging off of his chest plate. "We leave at 1800. Shepard out." "Getting into trouble?" Garrus asked. "Getting into business of somebody else's, which is about the same thing. Come on, the ship is moored in the Alliance private dock off of the C-Sec Academy." That must have cost a fair bit of coin, Rex considered. After all, giving anybody non-temporary moorage meant that they were costing themselves commercial traffic. That meant lost money, which had to be recuperated instantly and wholly. Rex tried to think of where he learned about that. The memory attached to the knowledge was long, long gone. Such was the way with Krogan memories. They just weren't built to hold so many centuries of memories like the Asari were. Their path took them up a long elevator. Rex felt a smirk twist in his broad lips.
"So it must be difficult for you to have all this death and destruction coming from the hands of a Turian specter, eh, Garrus?" he asked.
Garrus just rolled his eyes. "Saren's either a traitor or a madman. Taking him down will restore the good name of Turians everywhere." Rex laughed.
"Good to hear it. I was losing sleep over the prospect of people not loving the Turians."
The smirk on Shepard's face showed that she agreed with the assessment. "I just hope that you're willing to pull your weight when push comes to shove, even if that shove means you have to shoot Krogan," she said. Rex shrugged.
"Anybody who fights us is either stupid or on Saren's payroll. Killing the latter is business. Killing the former is a favor to the galaxy, Krogan included."
"Good to hear it," Shepard said. The elevator mercifully came to a halt and opened onto another elevator. Shepard glared at it like it had done her a personal wrong, and then moved into it, punching the up button with that same vigor. Tinny, terrible music started to flood in on them as they ascended yet again, which caused Rex to grind his teeth. One of these days, the Krogan would either be extinct or have enough of a voice that they could demand the Muzaks stop. Permanently, everywhere, on pain of crush. Finally, to break the silence, Rex cleared his throat.
So, Garrus, who do you think would win in a fight between you and Shepard?
Garrus looked to Rex, and the Krogan half expected a confused comment. But then he turned to Shepard, seeming to gauge her very carefully. Honestly, I can't say. I'm going to have to get back to you on that, Garrus admitted. Rex shrugged.
Fair enough.
You size up everybody for a fight? Even your allies? Shepard said.
Yes.
Rex pointed out the obvious. It managed to drop out of the way just before she walked into it. Instead, though, she started beating feet across an outcropping which jutted out from the outer floors of the Presidium Ring. Almost naked to space, with the atmosphere only held inside by a delicate Mass Effect field. The ship didn't look like any Rex had ever seen. Too curvy. Almost like Grandfather said the Rachni used. There were 2 humans on the dock waiting for them. One was small, grayed, and looked like the universe used him as a toothing rod. The other... Rex had taken one look at the man 20 years ago, and decided that there were in fact humans who he felt no desire to pick a fight against. And pointedly, there were humans he wasn't sure he could win a fight against. That sensation remained to this day, despite how much 20 years could do to a human. Udina? Anderson, Shepard said.
Vicarian?
Anderson said with a nod.
Anderson?
Rex muttered.
Rex?
Anderson answered. Garrus glanced between all parties. Shepard? He asked.
Don't push it. It was funny until you ruined it,
Rex said. So, this is my ship? Shepard asked, turning away from the one which had caught Rex's eye, towards a bulky, blocky freighter which had moored opposite it. Slightly disappointing, actually. No, the human who was, by process of elimination, Ambassador Udina said. Anderson is stepping down from command of the Normandy. It's your ship now. Shepard leaned back, disgust on her face. What? No, this will not stand. Anderson shook his head. You need a ship of your own, and this one's quick, quiet, and you know the crew. It's the perfect ship for a Spectre, and it needs to be in your hands, Anderson answered the indignation. Shepard glared, but not at Anderson. Even Rex wouldn't have tried that. Come clean with me, Captain. Why are you agreeing to this? Shepard asked. You owe me that much. Anderson's face pulled into tightly controlled anger. I was in your shoes 20 years ago. I was a Spectre, but one mission with Saren, and it all fell apart. That man was a monster then, and he's a monster now. Rex didn't say anything, but he wagered that Saren wasn't this human's biggest problem with being a Spectre. Namely, his inability to be anything close to discreet bordered on Krogan. Shepard took a deep breath. Saren isn't going to get away from us, she promised. We just have to find the conduit first, Anderson said, which Rex tucked away for later inquiry. There he has the advantage. His Geth are combing the Traverse for clues. There were reports of Geth orbiting over Pharos a few days ago, Udina mentioned. As well, Saren very recently, and not very legally, came into possession of controlling stock in a biotech firm on Noveria. Not very legally? Garrus asked. A spousal claim deferral from Benezia Tassoni to Saren, which is impossible since there is no marriage on the books, Udina said. Rex raised an eyebrow at that. So, the little pyjack had use after all, even if it was tracking paperwork across half a galaxy. What about Tassoni? He's obviously controlling her, but how? Shepard asked. It might be something to do with her daughter, Anderson said. She was last seen delving into a Prothean site in the Thurum system. Saren may well have imprisoned her there to gain cooperation from her mother. So I guess we have our first stop, Shepard said. As long as she doesn't turn out to be Mommy's little villain, we'll remove Saren's control over the matriarch, and his plan will start to crumble in on itself. I wouldn't be so confident, Anderson warned. Saren is a very smart man. He knows how to keep things together, even when they should be flying apart. I hate him, but I will not underestimate him. He's after these Reapers, and it's still up to us to try and stop him from bringing them back. But for the love of the gods, Shepard, don't make any messes out there, Udina said with annoyance. You may have all the fun, but I'm the one left behind cleaning everything up. I will stop Saren, Shepard swore. You can deal with the rest. Good hunting, then, Anderson said with a nod. And keep our avatar out of the fire, Rex.
I will offer no such promises,
Rex answered flatly. Then he stomped his way onto the ship he'd be working on for the foreseeable future. There'd be a nice quiet spot for him to have himself a lean. He'd just have to find it. After all, an hour's contemplation in a whorehouse was hardly enough once you got as old as Rex. Anderson and Udina had left, claiming paperwork in both cases. The aliens had filed in rapid succession, the Quarian having caught up during the stretch that Shepard was stuck talking to the diplomat and the old soldier. That left her last through the airlock. The Normandy was a ship quite unlike any else in the Alliance fleet. The airlock opened just behind the helmsman, rather than well out of the way of anything vital. But conversely, it was well ahead of the CIC, which was protected from hypothetical incoming fire by all of the bulk of the rest of the ship. Rows of gunners, cyber warfare specialists, and other soldiers of technical expertise lined the path leading from the helm to the holotank which sat near the heart of the ship. It was a small crew, but then again, the Normandy was a small ship. "Joker," Shepard said, glancing to the man who seemed glued to the pilot's seat. "At least somebody was on the ball today. Bring us out of dock in half an hour. Jump to the Artemis Tau cluster, NASA system." "Aye, Commander," Joker said, not looking back. "ETA 9 hours. Not bad for a trip 2/3 of the way across the galaxy. She turned to leave, but she heard a creak behind her. She turned back and saw that Joker was trying to rise from his chair, and not succeeding very well. Maybe he was sitting down because he was drunk. Finally, he abandoned rising with a shrug, and pivoted his chair slightly to where the co-pilot sat. "I heard the news that you'd be replacing Captain Anderson. That just doesn't seem right. Survives 300 battles against the Turians and the Batarians, and ends up getting hamstrung by politics." He understood what was at risk, Shepard pointed out. "Not much I could do about it in any case. What did you want, Joker?" Joker shrugged, and flicked a haptic display, priming the ship-wide intercom. "I figured you might have something you want to say to the crew. Now'd be the time." "And why exactly am I supposed to be delivering rousing speeches? I'm a soldier, not a politician," Shepard dismissed. "Well, yeah, but you're our soldier. And call me crazy, but I think you should let them know that," he shrugged. "The whole power of 1,000 generations of benders thing couldn't hurt either, just saying." Her pointed glare told him that she agreed with him, but wasn't happy about it. "Listen up, Normandy. This is your commander speaking," the Avatar said. "We have our orders. Find Saren before he finds the conduit, and I refuse to allow anything to get in the way of that mission. The Council wants to ignore this. No big surprises. They've never helped us in the past, and they have no reason to start now. But we don't need their help. We can do this on our own." Shepard rose, her back straight, as she stared up through the displays and past the guts of the Citadel, into the diffracted light of the Widow Nebula. "Wherever Saren goes, we'll be on his heels. When he searches for the conduit, we'll be the footsteps in the dark which keep him awake at night. If he flees to the blackness of dark space, we will follow him, and I guarantee you he will not escape from us. None of the other species have the guts, grits, or balls to deal with this. Luckily, humanity's got enough to make up for everyone else. As of this moment, Saren Arterius is already dead. He just doesn't know it yet." "Wow, that was kinda terrifying," Joker pointed out. She turned to look at him. "But in a good way," he offered, throwing his hands up in mock horror. He gave a chuckle. "Look, Anderson would be proud. Seems like his kind of pep talk." "Fancy speeches aren't going to solve any problems," Shepard pointed out, turning away from the helmsman. "The only thing which ever solves a problem is proper application of metal at sufficient velocity. And next time I see you, you better be sober, Joker." Whatever answer Joker had to that was lost as Shepard moved through the ship, past where Al-Wahim was talking to Presley. The Siwangi woman gave a nod to her as she passed and moved down the stairs. She strode past where Alenko was fiddling with a blinking panel, and ducked into the bunks which she temporarily called home. It was something of an irony that she'd ended up bunking opposite of Alenko in this ship, just as she had both in Republic City and on the side trip to Tuchanka. Now, though, there was finally some distance, and she wouldn't be forced to learn through osmosis. She was not an educated woman. She had no time for it. She'd been living in beds like this, sometimes hot bunking, for almost as long as not. Even when offered better, she still didn't feel right. She reached under the bunk, into the slot which held her footlocker. With a heave, she pulled it out, slinging it onto her shoulder. Her entire life, crammed into about a cubic meter. She hauled her life on her back, across the mess. Nobody spoke to her, fitting since she didn't have anything left to say today. People said that there was a post-coital glow about folks. She hadn't had the experience. Momentary bafflement, sure. She had no idea how that had happened. It happened so quickly. It was like the escalation which almost hit nuclear war after Avatar Korra's time. She reached the other side of the doors, which led to Anderson's, to her chambers, and leaned on the closing door. It didn't really sit well with her that she equated casual, unexpected sex with a near doomsday scenario. The room had been picked clean of Anderson's possessions. Not surprising. He probably knew that he was out even while Shepard was talking to the disgraced general. She tossed her footlocker onto the table and cracked its lid. Out came 2 uniforms, taking up a fraction of the space of the folded-away dresser. A few books on military tactics, penned by Prince Iroh back in the 32nd century. Her predecessor, Avatar Hong's definitive biography of every known Avatar who came before him, including the gaps where they weren't found for an entire generation. That was just about it. The vid chips she'd never gotten around to watching sat in the corner of the locker. Now she might actually have a chance. The commander probably had a final say in what got watched during downtime. Other than that, there was just 2 things. She picked up the higher of the 2 objects. It was an old-style photograph, but held up well, even through the singed edges. It showed a family together, 2 girls, one of them little more than a toddler, a man in a gray business suit, a subtle smile on his face. The woman, on the other hand, was beaming, waving towards the camera. The second child was covered in mud, so that the only thing visible on her face, really, was the bright white of grinning teeth, as she sat on the haunches of a somewhat amused-looking Elcor. There was a dull thud as the docking clamps let go of the hull, and the ship started to slip into the black. She stared into the photograph, at the woman, with a pale blue arrow pointing directly towards the bridge of her nose, as she stood proud in her orange and yellow dress. At the mud-caked girl, for whom only glimpses of similar shades could be seen. How had she ever been that young, innocent? Everybody in the picture except her was dead now. She put the picture back into the corner of the locker and pulled out the last contents of it. It was dark orange and yellow and red and black, but only the first 2 colors were supposed to be there. It was also much too small for her to wear, but then again, it had been more than half a lifetime since she'd worn her cavi. Almost that long since she'd airbent in any meaningful capacity. It was actually harder than waterbending now, which confused her to no end, since it had come as easily as breathing when she was young. She shook her head, a quiet, hollow sighing rising up from her throat, as she dropped her own singed, bloody air nomad cavi back into the footlocker. That was a person she could never be again. Codex Entry. Citadel Races. Culture. The Avatar. Seemingly unique to all the species in the galaxy, the Avatar is a human, having not appeared to any other races, who is able to bend or manipulate all 4 of the elements at will, rather than being limited to only a single type. The Avatar also serves in diplomatic and spiritual leadership roles amongst humanity historically. The position is neither hereditary nor appointed, and cannot be bestowed by birth. The Avatar, or perhaps bearer of the Avatar spirit, is a reincarnation of those men and women who have come before. The Avatar is born on the day of the death of the previous incarnation, and was once usually identified early in childhood, but only trained in their non-native elements from the age of 16 onward. This practice came to an abrupt halt with the purge of the air nomads by the Fire Lord Sozin. From that point on, rather than knowing whom the Avatar was and training him or her once reaching the proper age, it was a matter of simple chance that the correct child could be found. With a rapid spiking population after the end of the First World War, and the number of benders commensably increasing, identifying the Avatar amongst all newborns, even if the proper element was known at the time of death of the previous incarnation was had with certainty, became a daunting prospect. Several incarnations were not discovered at all within the last 2 centuries. Historically, the Avatar held a position of superseding politics and rank. An Avatar's word was more than law if demanded. An Avatar was well within their rights to empty a throne, rebuke an army, or punish a criminal regardless of the stature or nationality. This power was clawed back sharply after the incarnation of Avatar Aang. Although Avatar Korra still managed to impose upon the politics of the day, it was much more from within the system. In the modern era, there is no official political sanction or power which is afforded the Avatar, but a certain degree of respect of the position is usually given, out of the sake of tradition. The most well-known and feared ability of the Avatar is entering the Avatar state. It is a state of heightened connection to the past incarnations. An Avatar can act with the combined strength, skill, and endurance of all of his or her previous incarnations. This tends to result in bending of spectacular scale, including but not limited to whole-scale manipulation of ocean tides, physical rearrangement of the surface of a planet, or fundamentally altering the state of another person's soul.